Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our channel. As I am here with the jazz shepherd, Daniel Van Isle, and I am Ken McAuliffe, jazz vinyl audiophile, and we've been trying to set this up for a while to talk about jazz. You can go to other channels where people will ask you about pressings. You know, everybody talks about pressings, particularly in jazz, because as we've talked about, there's nobody actually talking about jazz on YouTube. As someone who has so many of the pressings, the records, they're not pressings, they're records that we all sort of lust after. Dan did a recent 10-inch video, and I was just shocked at some of those records. I've never seen them. I was curious what you think of this proliferance of all these reissues and how well they're all doing. Tone Poet, ERC, which is madness, Craft, which is greed, Tone Poet, Classic Series, Vital Vinyl. There's so many of them. So what's your take on all these reissues, which 5 years ago didn't exist except for Music Matters?
My first initial thought on the whole thing is, thank goodness the music's getting out there to people. This is probably the most underappreciated American art form that exists. And it's a phenomenal expression of a people that is appreciated everywhere else in the world. And Americans have really disconnected with its own history for numerous reasons. And jazz has been such a sidebar to the music business for so long. It's great to see the resurgence of jazz vinyl. It's always been a big part of the vinyl resurgence in my mind, the jazz collector. Jazz has always been kind of available with OJC and other pressings throughout the years. But all these new ones, Tone Poet especially, I think is fantastic. I can speak most about that because I've bought a lot of those because they're putting out some of that Blue Note catalog that's not available elsewhere. I haven't purchased a lot of the other ones because I have the original Bethlehem's, I have the original Savoys. So I can't speak too much on it, but the fact that the music's getting out there to the people, the music's what matters, And I think the music with the original artwork, if you could get that to people for a decent price and not be gouging people, more power to them.
And you came up with a bunch of great questions, 10 questions, and we can just sort of go back and forth on who asked them first or answers them first.
Sure.
Who do you listen to more often, Monk or Mingus? Mingus. I didn't have any sleep last night. I'm so tired. So Monk or Mingus, which one do you listen to more often?
I would say Monk pretty easily. I do love certain Mingus records a lot. There's a lot of Mingus records I don't play. His candid stuff's too out there, and the fidelity is really low on those. I do love Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful record. I love the piano record on Impulse as well. But with Monk, I love his early piano stuff on Riverside, where they were kind of just breaking him in, Orrin Keep News was. And then, of course, Brilliant Corners really turns the corner for a lot of modern jazz and even the first openings of the Avant-garde. Although arguably Pithecanthropus erectus in 56 by Mingus is one of the most groundbreaking records on a label that wasn't afraid to take chances. Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane. Pithecanthropus erectus is 1956, and people forget that. That's ahead of the curve in all the essence of avant-garde. Only guys like Jimmy Joffrey are doing stuff as out as Pithecanthropus, and Pithecanthropus really is acidic Ellington.
See, I'm the opposite of that. I'll listen more to Mingus than Monk. In fact, I was ready for this because I'm doing I'm trying to do a Mingus video, so I've really been listening intently so I can show off all my show and tell nonsense here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Mingus is more underrated than Monk. Monk is more out there for whatever reason. He's more trumpeted, and I don't quite know why. Mingus is a difficult figure, but I agree some of his music, it definitely leads to the avant-garde. You can hear it. In fact, I posted a video here recently, maybe I haven't, of him playing in Belgium with Danny Richmond, Clifford Jordan, and Eric Dolphy. And, Dolphy's out the whole time. But, Mingus is just, you can hear everything in his music. The church, you hear swing, you hear gospel. But I agree about Monk. I like the early, the Riverside. I like the Prestige. I believe it's Prestige work. Those records. I love the record with the Art Blakey. That's a sort of an unsung record.
Even the early Blue Note Monk stuff is really fantastic compared to early Miles on Blue Note. Those early Monk records are really, he's already developed who he is. And what I love about Monk so much, Parker's innovation was all those notes in the scale and really flying through the ladders. Monk was that distillation of just playing the few notes that hit him in that right place. I've often described Monk as a cat walking across a piano. Ching, chang, chong, chong. Just that minimalist dissonance, but usually he resolves it by the end, you know?
And just such a great composer. I mean, I don't know if Miles wrote some great stuff, obviously, but he often drew from his, sidemen to write great stuff for him. But Monk
he borrowed from Monk as well, around midnight.
Right, yeah. And Monk is so profound in the that's as far as being a composer. I almost feel like for me, even though they're great records, by the time he gets to Columbia, he seems a little worn out or saturated or something. Yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah.
It's hard to say exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have that energy. But I guess that's close to when he goes into seclusion and Weehawken or something with his cats.
He was a eccentric fellow, no question.
I heard a funny story. Pardon?
If you could add 5 years to either man's career, who would you choose? Clifford Brown or John Coltrane?
Well, I want to answer that first. Somebody told me a story about Monk once. I forgot who it was. Oh, sure. That I think maybe T.S. Monk told the story that Miles would go out to visit Monk when he was in Weehawken. And he showed up, and I forgot who told me the story. And he would show up sometimes, or this time he showed up, and Monk was asleep. And they said, well, hold on, we'll go get him. And Miles said, don't wake him up. I'll just wait for him here. When he wakes up, I mean, just that level of, respect and adoration.
And a hint of fear.
And a little bit of fear.
Yeah, I think he was a bit, Monk had some edges to him, I think. You didn't want to upset the man before you wanted to work with him.
Mingus as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And Mingus was a jerk at times.
That's what it seems to be. Yeah, that whole story with Juan Tizol, he punched him out or something, or
punched out numerous guys. Jimmy Nepper, he pulled a gun on and punched.
Right.
Numerous incidents.
Yeah, and I know a good friend of mine is Frank Katz. His father was Dick Katz, and apparently Mingus asked Dick Katz to play on one of his records, and Katz said, "No, you might punch me out or something." Recalling the thing with Jimmy Nepper. But it's interesting because he punched Jimmy Nepper, whatever, broke his jaw or something. But then Nepper later played on some of his records. I guess that was kind of undeniable.
Mingus had that attraction, but I don't think he went back to Mingus after the punch out. I don't think.
I might have misread that. I forgot where I read that.
I think he held that grudge for a long time, from my memory.
Right. So your question about Clifford Brown or Coltrane. Now it's interesting, two not only stylistically different guys, but Coltrane was ever evolving when he died. I have a theory that I think Coltrane would have gone back inside.
I agree 100%.
But I don't really know. I think of Clifford Brown as this brilliant composer. I mean, player with a gorgeous tone and incredible technique. I mean, sort of unrivaled, really. But I don't have any idea where he would have gone. What do you think?
He's clearly one of the founders of the hard bop sound. And they restate those choruses, given those melodic idea what they're playing. And his ideas are so fresh and melodic and rhythmic and always have such tonality. I think as hard bop moves into the newer sounds coming out in the late 50s into the 60s, I think Clifford Brown would have given us some edges, but with that incredible melodic sensibility, I think it would have been some fantastic music. It would have been enticing and exciting and possibly change the face of jazz.
Really? You think that would be that powerful?
I think he was such a star, even at that young age, and even though it was a short career, he was seen by his peers as a giant. And people were in tears when they heard about his passing. And I think he's lost his luminosity over time. Emerson hasn't been promoting jazz the same way like Columbia and Miles and Monk. And the label you're on has a lot to do with your lasting legacy. If you're on some obscure label most of your career, and that label goes the way of the dodo bird, your legacy kind of will go with that oftentimes.
But he was on MRC for those Clifford Brown records, right?
Yep. And that was the lion's share of his work there, those MRC, Clifford Brown, Max Roach. Those are some of the most important records of 55, 56. and they're cutting edge in the time frame of the lineology. Like they're really ahead of the curve. And I think Clifford would have stayed cutting edge. I really do. And I think he had the chance to be the biggest name in jazz going into the 60s if he had not passed.
What year did he pass?
56, a few months after Parker. So we lost one of our great innovators in Parker, and then we lost our young new stallion a few months later.
And that's two great, amazing musicians, icons in the idiom who people don't really give much of a shit about anymore. It's so bizarre, just in your group and my group, what people post. And it's great people post it all, and they keep wanting to join both of our Facebook groups. And, we're slowly adding to our YouTube channel. But people will buy what they're told to buy. And it upsets me that, MRC, which is owned by Universal, and Verve as well, even though they have reissued some of the Charlie Parker records, they can make a star out of Clifford Brown all again if they wanted to, but they just choose not to.
Yep.
Drives me nuts.
It's one of my least favorite things, and why my channel exists in a lot of ways, is to push the light onto some of the artists that people are just forgetting about. There's more to jazz than Miles Davis and John Coltrane. And there's a lot of people whose collections, my collection 20 years ago was 40 Miles records, 40 Coltrane records, and 40 other jazz records. They're just such big names that even as a rock and roll guy, you cross over into Miles. And Miles gets you into Coltrane. And those two are so above the genre today. And I'm not diminishing what they did, but they weren't that above their peers at the time. Neither
Coltrane was by the end of his life. He was seen as, he could pull so many people along with him. But yeah, Monk is still pretty highly thought of because they keep reissuing his records. But yeah, and Sonny Rollins is still alive. But I kind of think he dropped off after 1970. You have a lot of that.
He did. Rollins does drop off after 70 for sure.
Yeah, it's really strange. I remember seeing him at Town Hall in the 90s with Steve Jordan on drums, playing like funk tunes, and I was just like, "Why am I here?"
Wow.
It was just anyway. I'm curious, and this is not a question we had on here. Bethlehem, Savoy. What are the other obscure labels that you have been able to collect?
Boy, it's kind of a pretty bottomless list, but Roost is a very important record out of New York, and Teddy Reeg had worked with Savoy and Herman Lubinsky. Lubinsky was a difficult guy. He goes and starts Roost Records, and Roost is a very cutting-edge record in the 50s, early 50s. They're at work with Sonny Stitt, the stuff with Johnny Smith, the stuff with Stan Getz, Selden Powell. Roost has a real important cutting-edge thing going on. They're ahead of Blue Note at that time. Blue Note's reissuing old French concerts of Sidney Bechet and licensing stuff from labels from Europe. Blue Note hasn't really developed their sound yet. Roost has a great core of about 50, 60 records, plus about 23 10-inches. That's a really outstanding catalog that's really overlooked. Bethlehem is also right there, more on the white side of things in the early 50s, being very cutting edge. And they also innovate along with the West Coast kids from Woody Herman and Stan Kenton's group, something I call cool bop. It's a term I've recognized lately because I don't think cool represents a lot of that West Coast music very well. Chico Hamilton was cool. Dave Brubeck was cool. But some of that hard driving white bop music, it's not hard bop because emotionally it doesn't have that same tenacity and tension. But the tempos are there, the musicianship is there. I call it cool bop.
Which players are you referring to?
What's that?
Which leaders are you referring to?
Oh, some of those Bethlehem cats like Claude Williamson, Charlie Mariano, Frank Rosalino. A lot of these cats were making records on the West Coast, and it's much more modern than we seem to remember. Shelly Mann's groups, Howard Rumsey's groups, these guys were swinging pretty hard.
No, Shelly Mann is, he's just like in his own category. But isn't Howard Rumsey, I don't know, I've seen those records. Isn't that more like trad jazz?
No, he's not if you're meaning Dixieland, New Orleans, not at all.
Really?
He's very much post bop, not really hard bop, but those guys were swinging hard at the Lighthouse. That's hard swinging modern jazz.
For some reason, I just considered. Shorty Rogers, I guess he's in that terrain.
He's absolutely in that.
Right.
They're all refugees from the Stan Kenton, Woody Herman groups that in their big ensembles, they were limited to what they could do. And they were also, a lot of them were available to be signed. So when Bethlehem opened up a West Coast office, it made sense to sign Charlie Mariano, Stu Williamson, Claude Williamson, Frank Rosalino, Conti Condoli. Those guys were all making really hard driving, cool bop records.
Right. It's funny. I went to Oakland a couple years ago, and they have a ton of record stores out there. And I was convinced I was going to find all these contemporary records and I don't know what else is out there. I didn't find anything. Kind of blew my mind.
It's pretty picked over nowadays for sure.
Yeah, it just wasn't.
Specific, fantasy, contemporary, of course. And there's a host of smaller labels on the West Coast that do, from half dozen to 30, 40 great records. Too endless to list them all, but a lot of great little labels out there. Argo is very underappreciated out of Chicago. Emercy had a short run, but it's 150 records that are all incredible. Again, Bethlehem Savoy. There's Storyville out of Boston,
right,
which is a George Weins label. A lot of little great titles on that label. So there's a lot out there.
It's funny you mentioned Roost, and there are those labels out there that when you find the records, they are well played because people dug those records. It's true with all the Johnny Smith records, anything on Roost. If you can find Beverly Kinney on Roost in good shape, that's worth a ton of money.
Very expensive.
And I know when we get the Coltrane records at the store, like Early Impulses, they are played. Not so much the later ones, but like Crescent and Coltrane and all those records, they're really played.
Even that Coltrane Ballads on Impulse, I see beat up copies of that all the time.
Well, that's a great record. And it's funny because you had said in a video, or we had a conversation that Field didn't quite know, or Creed Taylor, what he was getting into. And I was reading some of the house that Train built, and he sort of agrees. I mean, he sort of confirms that to some degree. I think he just didn't know how far out Train was going to go. I don't think Train knew.
I was going to say, I don't think Train knew.
I don't think Train knew. Oh. And now with this new record, which I liked a lot, and I think you didn't, the last night of the week in Seattle, it kind of confirms where he was going. But I think at some point he could only go so far out. He would have done something really simple and come back. What do you think?
Well, I just first want to say I didn't dislike it. I just don't think it's an essential piece.
Okay.
It's if you like avant-garde and you're okay with some lower high fidelity, if that's your thing, it's an important piece. What I don't want is people who aren't really knowledgeable about jazz to hear this is an essential piece, buy that and go, I'm never going to buy another jazz record again. That's what I'm trying to prevent. And so I think it needs to be said, this is a very spicy, well-seasoned meal. If you like that, you might enjoy it.
Yeah, I think if you know A Love Supreme, the original, really, really well, and you also like his avant-garde stuff, then you'll dig it. But I heard people, I run into this thing in rock records sometimes. People think the original studio recording is the Bible and cannot be touched. Getting more into remastering and all that kind of stuff, that's neither here nor there. Do you have, like all my collection is primarily jazz. I have one row on the bottom that's all rock, and then I have like this many Brazilian records, that many dance records. What's the ratio in your collection?
I got about 6,000 jazz vinyl, and that's less than half of my collection.
Less than half?
Yeah.
Wow. What's the rest of it?
Probably 1,000 classic rock, probably 2,000 funk soul R&B, probably 2,000 hip hop records, a bunch of reggae, electronica. All stuff I DJ'd for years. I was a DJ playing R&B, soul, hip hop, reggae, and jazz is something I kind of discovered through the roots of that music. When you hear Ray Charles, you got to go back to Louis Jordan, back to Duke Ellington, And so the jazz was always learning the antecedents of what I was listening to and DJing. And slowly the jazz became more and more essential to me, in part because I have a problem with words. As I've gotten older.
You have a problem with words?
Yes, I have a problem with words because they're very dishonest.
Your words? You're super articulate. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I'm talking about lyrics in a song.
Oh.
when you write a lyric in a song and you are talking about how much you love Betty Sue, when Betty Sue cheats on you 6 months later, but the crowd still wants to hear that song, you have to be kind of dishonest to even sing that song because you're not feeling it like you once wrote it. And there's an immediacy in jazz that doesn't allow for me to have to be phony with what I'm saying. I'm always going to speak directly from my soul and say exactly how I feel today, right now. And to me, that's refreshing. Words are very dishonest. They're very programmed. They're packaged in a way to make you think I'm something that I want you to think I am. Take the average hip hop guy. How much fake is in what he's telling you? There's so much boistering and blustering and how great am I, all this stuff. And the real is often very different from the fake.
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody, pop music in general, it's all just songcraft and trying to present something. So you DJ'd a lot for Black audiences as well, right?
Primarily, it's been what I've done the last 20 years, depending on the venue. And here in Minneapolis, which is supposed to be a liberal place, there's still an incredible degree of segregation and discrimination.
So I wanted to ask you, and this is an eternal question for me that I don't understand the answer. Why is it, it's certainly here in New York City, it's certainly true at our store, why is the audience for jazz still primarily white when all the great artists are Black? I don't have the answer for that. It's
primarily in the danceability of it. And the danceable jazz grafts itself into rhythm and blues in the 50s. That Louis Jordan transition into dance music, rhythm and blues, it's where the charts went. You look at the charts, he had 40 big hits in a small era in the late 40s, early 50s. And rock and roll comes out of that same thing at the same time. And the Black community's always been one very much about dancing. It's a release from the struggles and the stresses of the day. It's a sexual appetizer, dancing. And I've said before in a lot of my videos, the Black community is not guaranteed the mansion on the hill. And the Fortune 500 is not even realistic for them. But sex, that's a little bit of heaven paradise that they can usually count on. And so I think the music's always been very much enticing and alluring and filled with that pulse of that sexual groove. And when that ceases to be in jazz with bebop into hard bop, the avant-garde and free, most of the people who listen to jazz to dance couldn't follow it. And now it's at the absolute end of that. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people through the years, and I still go to the jazz clubs in the city, and like Smalls is a great place to go hear really visceral jazz. But some of the jazz I hear now by the younger contemporary composers, it's just a bunch of numbers, Yep. That's why in the UK, the UK scene is so vibrant. There's no swinging going on in the UK jazz scene. It's all a groove, Afro beat or whatever. And while I kind of a little bit of a drag, they don't enjoy the feeling of swing, but it's definitely jazz. They're just going for a different rhythm, and that's why that music has kind of blown up in the UK and to some degree here. A couple of the artists have been signed. To me, one of the great mysteries in jazz for me is here we are in 2021, and the average non-jazz listener's perception of jazz is a small sliver of the jazz universe that existed for a short, brief period of time. How have we gotten to that place where so many people who don't like jazz think of Albert Ayler and John Coltrane ascension as what jazz is? And I don't agree with that entirely. I think a lot of people think Miles and Coltrane. That's their first thought on jazz. I mean, most people don't know who Ayler even is. They don't know who that is, but I think there's enough in pop culture and media and movies where they have this hectic, frenetic sound, and that's what they associate with jazz. It just becomes a subliminal thing. Oh, I don't want to hear jazz. It's too frenetic. Well, that might be true on one end, but the other end is all that smooth jazz bullshit. That's why I don't allow Kenny G in the group. That's an insult to what this music is about. And all that horrible music. They used to have a smooth jazz class at Berkeley. Well, some people, they can't take any idea of jazz and soloing. They don't get it, even Dixieland. But on the other hand, if you heard all the smooth jazz stuff, which was popular for years, I'll tell you I'm not talking about Grover Washington. I'm talking about Gerald Albright and Kenny G. I'll tell you this, Ken. A lot of times when I've been DJing, I try to slip jazz in as a glue between sets. It gives it kind of a mood and an atmosphere. And I can't tell how many times I played something that was modern, contemporary jazz in the 50s, early 60s. And people came up to me and asked me what it was. They go, this is not jazz, but I like it. What is it? It's jazzy. They didn't think it was jazz. It was jazz. Oh, just I can't think of the example right now, but I'm talking like guitar jazz records from the 50s, like Al Caiola, or even some Kenny Burrell from that period.
I love Al Caiola.
A lot of that Bethlehem stuff, especially the East Coast Bethlehem. So you put on a Milt Hinton record, it's got some good swing to it. A Serge Chaloff thing, it's got melody and swing, and it's cool, and it's got an essence to it. And the perception from a lot of people is this is not jazz. What is it? I'm like, this is as jazz gets. This is the stuff that didn't get renamed something. This is jazz. That other stuff got a name because it was a deviation from what jazz was. So I think the redefinition needs to be done so people can not be afraid to buy jazz.
I'm older than you, and I can remember even up through the 70s, a swing groove was still in the popular media, like the Odd Couple theme. It was used in all the Lalo Schifrin soundtracks. Now that is nowhere to be heard.
I just watched the Lalo Schifrin soundtrack last night. It was a Steve Martin film with Queen Latifah bringing down the house, and it's Lalo Schifrin to the soundtrack.
I didn't know.
So there's some kind of jazzy moments interspersed through hip hop and R&B in that film.
So you'll play when you do your sets and you're doing segue stuff, you'll play things that swing.
Yeah, it's mostly a tempo and a feel thing. If it's early in the morning on a Sunday morning, I'll play something soft and quiet without horns, piano trio, or a guitar quartet maybe. And once it gets a little more prime in the set, soul jazz maybe will fit in there better. You're not going to be playing bebop or even hard bop very often at a set, and certainly not avant-garde. Just about the tempos and the colors. And if I got some nice electronic melancholy going on, it's easy to find a jazz piano piece, similar tempo, I can segue and go to a different place after that. So I love to use jazz as that little glue between genres and sounds.
That's a real art that I know nothing of. Who do you play more often, Basie or Ellington, and why?
For me, nowadays it's Basie, and it's partly because of Jean-Michel Riester Beethoven. He just turned me on to Basie. He's such a character. He's such an innovator in terms of his minimalist approach. James Brown was influenced by Count Basie. On the piano, he's a very clever, minimalist composer who gives you just a little sweet sugar and then lets the soloist do the work behind him. As hard a swinging as a group as there ever was. And that goes back to the Kansas City days in the late 30s, all the way through to those great groups in the 70s and 80s. And the lineup of cats that came through Basie's group, it's an all-star cast. Ellington, I had an earlier love affair with him, and I went through a lot of his work the last 15 years. And there's a sophistication and a modernity and beyond limitation or definition to what Ellington does that makes his compositions really original and unique. But right now it's Basie. How about
I'm
you?
the exact opposite, because I grew up when I was learning to play, I listened to a lot of Basie, and I played in big bands where you played Little Darlin' and all those Basie things. And I came to Ellington much later, and Ellington, just such an amazing composer, and those standards are standards in the American culture, and just such a wide, from masterpieces to indigos.
If I had to pick one record from both, it would be Ellington's Blues in Orbit.
Where was I at the other day where they were playing Blues in Orbit? I don't know how. I like indigos, I like masterpieces, I like Blues in Orbit. I don't think I could choose one. And Basie did all those great early Verve and Clef records that we have at the store. But as far as one who's less appreciated now, it's definitely Basie.
Sadly.
Basie and Ellington both. Universal could make Basie star if they wanted. They could do the same thing with Ellington, but they just, Miles has been so whored out. They're pimping him from beyond the grave. It makes me sick. That's another question.
They're pimping on his hip hop tracks, for Christ's sake.
This is a funny question. Which Blue Note star do you listen to more, Grant Green or Jimmy Smith?
And from what I remember, you're not really a fan of Grant Green or Jimmy Smith.
That's right. Probably more Jimmy Smith.
But I was curious, which one do you like more? Which one do you listen to more?
As far as their records, I'll probably play Jimmy Smith before, because the organ can sound really amazing on the hi-fi, and he has great sidemen. I don't even own any Grant Green records. I don't know why. There's just so many other guys. How about you?
I probably listen to Grant Green more, almost certainly. Jimmy Smith is one of the greatest beboppers of all time. His early organ work in 56, 57, it's earth-shattering how great a player he was. He's one of those guys that refer to himself in third person. Jimmy likes this, Jimmy don't like that.
Oh, is that right?
You got to be great to do that. You know, you got to be great to do that. But Idle Moments for me by Grant Green's one of the greatest songs ever. It's just a long blues, but it's just elegant and beautiful. And there's a refinement to it. And then Grant just has so much great spiritual soul jazz, real gospel inflected. I love them. I can DJ them all the time. Accessible.
I love his playing on other people's records more than his records, just for whatever reason. And it's weird how you know, I try to get people. I say you have to kind of listen beyond your era to get, when you're going back or other styles of music. It helps you if you love music to kind of listen beyond. And people won't do that with organ. People just or people sleep on organ records.
Yeah, they really do.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of the real jazz collectors in the last 20 years have been kind of, I don't want to say snobbish, but that avant-garde, complicated, sophisticated, and they've always been kind of snide towards organ people. And I even on the Facebook groups, you see if someone posts an organ record and 3 people are like too good for that. I don't like organ. I see a lot of that kind of, and I think they influence new jazz fans a lot. So everyone feels like they got to go out and buy Out to Lunch, which is fine in its own essence. But I think people are kind of almost persuaded not to get into organ jazz, which is ridiculous because House Party by Jimmy Smith, one of the most cooking records you'll ever hear. It's insane.
I agree. And I don't think it has anything to do with avant-garde. I mean, Blue Note is what's really collected more than anything. There's more Blue Note market records. I mean, that's the easiest thing to sell to people when they come in the store. Yeah. To me, I don't really understand it. They think it's corny, or they don't understand the B3, which is the first synthesizer.
Yeah.
It's even jazz fans. Jimmy Smith records will sit in the store longer than anything else. Horace Silver records will sit in the store, which is nuts. You know, another one of the great composers in jazz. Yeah. People are really, they're sort of cattle in a way.
They're misinformed 100%. They're misinformed.
I mean, it's and if you express a strong opinion, which you do, which I do sometimes, some people will get really offended. How dare you have an opinion? Oh, how dare you say that?
Yeah, I've gotten a few of those. Which drummer brings more thunder, Elvin Jones or Art Blakey?
Yeah, to me, they're just different kinds of thunder. I can never say one is more thunderous than the other. I mean, I've seen Elvin play. I never saw Art play. When Elvin would play, that a thing would like descend and would take over the whole room. It was like, whoa. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think, just from recordings? I don't know.
Part of why I thought of this question, oddly enough, was that live in Seattle. You get to hear the cacophony of Elvin Jones in full thunder mode very clearly on that, because the mics were right by him, from my understanding. Elvin had a way to play polyrhythms and do things that were very unique, and he could create a lot of delicate thunder, you know, intricate thunder. Just a furious player. And you see footage of them in Japan where the steam is coming off them in the cold, and they're just sweating and exuding from all this exertion. And so obviously, Elvin, to play with Coltrane, you got to bring a lot of thunder night in, night out. And Coltrane might go 12 minutes. He might go 28 minutes. So your endurance is going to be, you know, top of the mark. That being said, Blakey, there's such a thunderous roar to the stampede of what he does. And it doesn't have maybe some of the polyrhythms and accents that Elvin does, but I love Blakey. I just think there's such a genuine sincerity to what he does. He believes so much in his young sidemen, and he wants to push them out into the world to experience the jazz universe. He's one of the great jazz universities. And as a player, you take those early Jazz Messenger records and then those late 50s ones where you had Morgan and Fuller and Shorter. Those are some pretty amazing groups with Timmons and Merritt on the bass and the piano. And then Blakey's just back there laying down a 4-lane highway. It's magical what he does.
I always think of Art. He's instant thunder.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying he's instant thunder. He can come out of nowhere and blow something up, then retreat. Yep. So just
he can play a ballad. He can play a ballad.
Oh yeah, he's a great brush player, but he can. Yep. I mean, to generate a band to fucking wake up, he's the man.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
just explosive. But it's funny though. I love all those same records you love, but I'm not that crazy about the pure drumming records like Holiday and Skins. I
Like
forget the
Orgy and
name of the
Rhythm.
other. Yeah, Orgy and
Yeah,
Rhythm. They just don't quite. They almost seem contrived, like production records in a way.
yeah, probably somewhat. Which is
Yeah,
something Blue Note doesn't do a lot of. Blue Note doesn't do Christmas records. They don't do greatest hits records. They
right.
don't do the hits of Broadway compilations.
I never
Blue Note,
thought of that.
they don't.
There's
Every
only the
other
Duke
label,
Pearson Christmas record, but there's
what's
no like
that?
Motown equivalent,
No.
no Blue Note of a Motown equivalent.
From the time Blue Note launches to the sale, there's not a there's not a Blue Note greatest hits.
Wow, that's right.
Prestige, remember, all the other labels have greatest hits and collections and label samplers up the wazoo.
There are Japanese Blue Note collections, but it's stuff they contrived.
There's Blue Note collections when Liberty buys them. Almost instantly, there starts to be compilations.
Wow, right.
But when Alfred and Frank did it, there was no time for that nonsense.
Right,
We're documenting
exactly.
art right now. Such integrity is rare in this business.
That's a question for you. Which legendary trumpet player is more undervalued by today's collectors, Sweets, Edison, or Dizzy? I think Sweets is less known than Dizzy, even to me.
Well, Sweets is on a lot of the great Sinatra records.
Oh.
He was a great studio guy, and he plays with Basie for quite a long time as well. The Sweets Edison records on Verve with Norman Granz in the 50s are just gorgeous. When you listen to Billie Holiday, that muted trumpet and then that breathy saxophone, that's Sweets Edison and Ben Webster. And they're intricately weaving the wings of a butterfly behind Billie's voice.
And they had that record they did together, which is really popular. I forgot the name of it.
But when you listen to Billie sing, there's other great players on that record. Barney Kessel's on that record, and his little fills are nice. But when Sweets and Webster are talking to each other behind Billie, it's a magical thing. Sweets is an incredible player with a very saccharine, sweet tone that should be remembered far more so than he is. I'll counter that with Gillespie, who's also, I think, very underrated. He's such a great educator, one of the most brilliant players we've ever seen. However, he was a victim of the labels he was on. A lot of the stuff he did with some of those other smaller labels doesn't really have the staying power. He didn't have the sidemen, maybe. He has his big bands going on a while. Some of the Gillespie big band stuff hasn't translated to the present quite the same way. But Gillespie was always trying to modernize bebop by putting the big band with the bebop. People think of Gillespie with Parker, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, I think there aren't iconic Gillespie records just on his own. There are those records, Sunny Side Up, and then For Musicians Only. I think those isn't it? Yeah, those are pretty landmark records you can point out. But he doesn't have those except for the ones with Parker. I can't think of like instant Gillespie records. So they're ones on Verve, I guess. And man, they just sit in the store. We have that many.
That 10-inch I played yesterday of Gillespie and Stan Getz. That's some of the best Dizzy Gillespie you'll hear. Outstanding stuff.
Yeah, I have a 10-inch as well that's just on fire, and I forgot what label it's on. But it's funny because he was, when did he pass? In the 80s or something?
Probably, yeah, much later.
Long career, a great ambassador for jazz. But you think it has something to do with just the value of the trumpet compared to the saxophone?
Yeah, I think some of it's his flamboyant personality with his, he was laughing and having fun. And I think sometimes people have fun, get jazz is serious. I think he gets dismissed sometimes. Again, a lot of it's just the labels he recorded for. If Dizzy had made 4 records on Blue Note with the Blue Note side guys, and this is true for almost anyone who's obscure today. You put Charlie Chambers on Blue Note, Joe Newman on Blue Note, same result.
It's like I said. I mean, people will sort of buy. And they don't know where to go. That's why your channel is popular. That's why mine is somewhat popular, even though I cover more than jazz. People don't even know where to start. And I think they also see jazz as kind of intimidating, which it's the least intimidating music in the world. Anybody can swing. You play jazz to a little child, they start dancing. They get it.
Oddly enough, Dizzy's name has some ring to it. Non-jazz fans are familiar with the name Dizzy Gillespie because it's almost a caricature of jazz with the soul patch and the beret, and people know the name because Gillespie,
Right.
but his music and his legacy isn't the same as that stylized version of him.
Make movies about Miles, movies about Chet Baker, no movies about Dizzy, not even a really good documentary. Question number 7. You throw cocktail parties. You answer this question. You have 2 CDs to choose from, Getz or Baker.
I'm actually pretty torn on this one as well. With Getz, you can go several directions. You can do his hard bop, bebop era. You can do kind of his more modern compositional stuff from the 60s. And you can also, of course, go to the bossa nova stuff, which any cocktail party will thank you if you play Joao Gilberto and Stan Getz. DJing for years, I've dropped those records, tracks off them, Destinado, Corcovado, and they all have a roughness and an appreciation. They've appeared in films enough that people are familiar with, even if they don't know what it is. But that familiarity breeds a comfort. And so Getz, you couldn't go wrong with, but Baker has that wonderful, dour, woe is me tonality that I find alluring. He's a sad story. Chet Baker's not a happy tale. It's a sad story.
And Stan Getz was an asshole, but that's another story.
Absolutely. I think his playing embodies a lot of that. I think I'd probably go Getz over Chet Baker, but if you're looking for a Chet Baker, people out there to get to know Chet Baker, Alone Together on Riverside, that song, his version of that with Pepper Adams on the baritone, that'll sweep you into a noir film and you'll never want to leave that headspace. So Baker at his best was phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree. Getz has many directions to choose from, more moods, a greater array of music. And it's funny, when the whole reshoot thing began, and I just judge this by the store I work in, which I think is a pretty good barometer. We have this many old Stan Getz records. We have that many brand new reissues of Chet Baker records. Because the originals, those early Chet Baker records I think they're on World Pacific. Some of them, I don't even know what label they're on. They're impossible to find. Yeah. But man, because he's pretty and he plays a trumpet and he was a sad case, and the Bruce Weber movie was sort of like a burst of advertising for him. Those records, there's so many of them, it's crazy. He made some junky records too, though, the Tijuana Brass kind of stuff.
And you're right, Baker's records are very expensive, original pressings. And this is an interesting sidebar. We don't need to dive into this. We'll maybe talk about this next time. But if you ask yourself, who are the most collectible white jazz artists? And there's many facets to why this is. Chet Baker's at the top of that heap.
That's a really good point.
And again, white artists made records on white labels, which had far better distribution, far more access to people, sold far better. So that's partly why white records don't have the same capacity to bring the big money in, because those Verve records sold well. Those contemporary records sold well.
Tons of them.
Or a Savoy.
Yeah.
And so the black artists aren't just sung well because they're black. They're sung well because they're incredibly rare and didn't sell hardly at all back in the 50s and 60s.
I think the Blue Note records sold well, but Blue Note's such a unique case, obviously.
Well, when you talk about Blue Note, do you mean Sidewinder or do you mean early 1950s 1500 series? Because my understanding of the 50s era Blue Note is they were happy if they sold 5,000 copies.
I guess that's probably right. I mean, obviously Jimmy Smith was really popular.
He sold the back.
I mean, Cool Strutting is regaled now, but did it sell then? I really don't know.
No, all those 1500 series Blue Notes, none of them sold at all in the time frame they were released in. They've been reissued umpteen times, so they've created quite a marketplace share over the time. But as an original release, Blue Note was a very regional, small enterprise.
Fred Cohen says he set the bar for the most valuable Hank Mobley record, the one where he's wearing the sunglasses. I forgot the catalog number.
Yeah, like 1540 or something, yeah.
1542. He says only 1,500 of those were pressed. That's why that record is so incredibly valuable.
And then there's a second pressing where they probably sold another 1,000. And then when Liberty United artists buy them, they get second and third pressings again. And those pressings are much more available.
Right. So even then, you don't see that record very often, period. But I don't know I think the Blue Note records sold well in New York, and probably in Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit.
Yep.
But
That's what they. And there's a real gap between white records sales and distribution versus those small black labels. There's a big gap.
oh, totally,
And even
of course.
when we started running those labels, there just wasn't the accessibility, and you couldn't release a lot of those Blue Note records to a place in like Montana.
Right.
So when you're Verve or Capitol or Columbia, every record you make, you got to think about a national perspective of where this record's going to go. But those Blue Note records were so focused on just a certain demographic in a certain region, it allowed them to be very eccentric and specific in what they were doing.
Yeah, I think there was Miles and Coltrane, and there was everybody else to a degree. I mean, I think Coltrane won a Grammy or something. Was a big star at the time. This is a loaded question. Which do you prefer to listen to more regularly, Kind of Blue or Sketches of Spain? You can answer that question first.
Kind of Blue, and for me, it's a knockout. I used to love Sketches of Spain a lot more than I do now. It just doesn't swing enough for me. It's of course, got that European tradition laced through it. It's crafting that Spanish piece. I can't think of the name of the song right now throughout its interplay. And I love Sketches of Spain when I'm in the mood for it. If it's a hot summer day, kind of a dry breeze coming through the window, Sketches of Spain is a great thing. But Kind of Blue for me is the essence of black urbanity. It's hip, it's chic, it's got a classy wealth to it, even though I guess there was quite a bit of money by Columbia, Coltrane, Miles. These guys were doing okay. But Kind of Blue just has such a transcendence. And for even my personal listening, I love the headspace Kind of Blue puts me in.
For me, classic black urbanity would be an Ellington record, not a Kind of Blue record. And I love Kind of Blue. I don't even own it. I'd rather listen to Miles Ahead than either one of those records. Kind of Blue is great, but I honestly think people love it because it's so easy to like. It rolls over you like a pancake with blueberry syrup or something. I mean, there's some amazing solos. It has Blue and Green, which I think is one of the greatest jazz compositions of all time.
Absolutely.
And it swings hard in places, but I don't know. I guess part of my problem is just the backlash. I'm just tired of hearing about it. And you're
a punk rocker, New Yorker with you get sick of what's too cool. It's kind of in your nature. And Blue Note, Kind of Blue is overexposed.
Oh God, how many more copies do we have to see? How many more copies do people have to buy and post? It's one Miles. It's not, I don't think it's the best Miles Davis record. You can hear, anything I'm going to say about it. You can speak to it better than I can.
Coming out, man.
What?
Till Doomsday, that record's going to be being put out.
I guess. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
That record might be much to keep jazz in people's vernacular as any record out there. There's a lot of record collectors that have one jazz record, and it's that.
Yeah, and if people want to go farther, or dig deeper into Miles, it's just so pretty, top to bottom. It's a beautiful recording. It doesn't even sound like the other Miles Davis records. It doesn't sound like it was recorded at 30th Street. It sounds like it was recorded at Hackensack. It's very intimate.
Yeah.
But hey, what do I know? I'll answer this question because Black Market is one of my favorite jazz records of all time. Weatherport Black Market or Herbie Hancock Mwandishi. That's Black Market. I just love for so many different reasons. Incredible playing, incredible songs. It's I like it more than Heavy Weather from Black Weatherport. It's a visceral record. It's deep, it's driving. There's iconic moments all the way through it, like the one tune that starts. That's a different record where they take Shorter's soprano and it runs backwards into the song. I mean, it's just, there's so many, when you have Narada Michael Walden and Jaco Pastorius on this record, I think it's broader for me than Mwandishi. What do you think?
I probably listen to Weather Report more than Mwandishi. I'm more of a fan of the more funkier Hancock on Columbia. The first Columbia Hancock didn't sell very well, and Columbia wasn't too thrilled with it because it was still that Mwandishi sound that was kind of eccentric and kind of very fusion rock.
Sextant or something like that?
I think so, yeah. And then he follows it up with Manchild, and those next few records on Columbia are very fun records to play as a DJ. Great people walking into the club, atmospheric, nice pockets and grooves. So I do like the Mwandishi stuff, and I do like Weather Report. I have to say Weather Report.
Do you is Actual Proof, is the Thrust record something you play to black
Yes.
audiences? How do they respond to that?
It's more hip white kids. I like it, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll also say this about the black audience from my experience. To them, for most of them, jazz was Grover Washington. It's George Benson. That's what they think of as jazz, is that 70s R&B crossover. Quincy Jones was doing some of that stuff, Roy Ayers.
But what age group is that, a black listener? What age group of black listener is that?
40 plus. You know, the 40 plus. I have not met, but I actually had a live group, a jazz vinyl group started on Facebook as an actual group I used to meet. And all the black cats that used to come to that meeting, they were all that 70s fusion stuff. And none of them are really into Monk or Parker or Coltrane, Miles. That was not they like some of the Miles 70s stuff on the corner. But I've not met a lot of black cats that are really into hard bop or bebop or even the swing stuff, sadly. They're out there. I know some through Facebook, obviously. But even now, all those guys are into the soul jazz stuff.
Even our groups, I mean, I don't see the makeup of your Facebook group, but our group is, you know, jazz vinyl loves primarily white folks, you know.
Yeah. Sadly.
Yeah. In jazz, do you think live records are a better listen than most rock live records? Which have you played more in live? Song Remains the Same or Coltrane to Village Vanguard? Can you answer that first?
I listen to The Song Remains the Same a lot as an acid doing 20-year-old. I love Led Zeppelin back in those days. I used to drink a lot, party a lot. Those records, No Quarter live was fantastic. So there was a lot of listening to that record that I have to measure here. Village Vanguard is one of the most fierce live representations of emotive energy you'll ever come across. It's just intense. And that Village Vanguard box set that they put out, the 4 CDs, it'll leave your heart racing. I probably listen to Song Remains the Same more, but I'll give the nod to Village Vanguard for what I would listen to now.
I don't own any Led Zeppelin records, but I went to, when Song Remains the Same came out, I was in the audience at the, I saw Zeppelin live when I was like 10 or something. A friend of mine, his mother was a security guard. She would get us into those shows. I saw Zeppelin, The Who, Creedence, Conway Twitty. But, and then I remember going, what?
Madison Square Garden?
No. This was the Charlotte Coliseum in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
Then we became teenagers. We'd sneak into the shows. I got arrested at a Rolling Stone Stevie Wonder concert. We were hiding in the air ducts.
That's awesome.
But Song Remains the Same, I remember going to as a midnight movie. We'd get stoned and watch it. I can remember being like, what the fuck is going on with it? I didn't get it. And I don't know. Actually, right now, I'm listening more to all the Coltrane really out stuff than I ever have, because I prefer kind of the European strain of avant-garde, because Coltrane's out stuff is just like a constant hammering. It's just, man, it's so intense. And
which is a byproduct of the intensity of being a black male in America. You know what I mean? When you're living in Turin or Genoa or Nice, you can only be so intense about that experience. You're surrounded by fountains and gardens. So you can play beautiful avant-garde, but that tenacity and that tension, it's going to be hard to replicate that versus being a black male going to work in Newark.
Well, there's all my avant-garde records are there, and there's a lot more air in European avant-garde. There's just more air. There's more like Old and New Dreams. There's more playfulness. There's no playfulness in any of Train's stuff. He is beating the walls down. I mean, there's no let up. There's no air. It's just, if anything, I really think, just like we've had this conversation before, I believe records like Live Evil and Live at the Fillmore West, I think those records were ahead of their time and make more sense now than they did then. And I think that's probably true of the Coltrane records. And even like the Albert Eiler records, Fred Cohen at the store, he says when those records came out, nobody cared about those ESP records, but now people gravitate to them. I think there was something ahead of its time when those came out. And the Coltrane, it's just like warfare. You know.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a very intense experience of the Black experience in America. And keep in mind this incredible statistic. The average Black male dies 8 to 10 years younger than the average white male. Think about how many Black males have to die young for that to be the case. Your skin color means you're going to die 8 years younger than the average white male in this country.
You're going to go to jail a lot sooner and get shittier health care and get worse access to jobs and
imprisonment and all those things. Absolutely.
We can elect a Black president, but then we can elect a total, I won't call him what he is.
There's no words for him.
Yeah, there are no words. Well, hey, man, I think we cut most of them there. I'm glad you did this. I'm glad we finally did it. I hope people like it.
I think it's interesting. I think people enjoy us bantering back and forth about it. And I think we should do this at least once a month.
I'm game.
See how it goes.
All right, man. Very good. We had fun. I hope you listeners had fun viewing us bantering on.
We had a great time. Thank you, Ken, for having me. I appreciate you guys out there in YouTube land. Check out my channel, The Jazz Shepherd, if you don't know about it. We talk about the music, the history, the background behind all this music, because that's how we understand what it's about. Without context, art means nothing. Again, Ken, thank you for all your support. You've been a great friend these last 3-4 years. I enjoy all of our conversations. And it's nice to finally do an episode like this together. The first of many, I hope.
It was a blast for me. I defer to your wisdom, sir.
Again, be safe, my friend.